What's up, guys? My name is John Beaupre, aka Casino Crime, here on Deuces Cracked. And hey, we had a pretty long stretch of PLO MTT videos, so I thought we'd get back to some live action. And what I'm going to do for probably, I guess, 2 episodes is review a live play video that was recorded, I think, yesterday, which is December 2015. Actually, right now, it's Christmas Eve, and I'm recording a video for you guys. Yes, I live quite the glamorous lifestyle, that's for sure. No, but before I go out and start drinking and eating my ass off, I'm going to be talking about, some methods for beating 100 Zoom in 2015 and leading into 2016. And it seems cool that we've got some footage that we can use that's current. So that's nice. As with all my other videos, what I'm going to be talking about mostly today is the strategies, tactics, best practices for, increasing your win rate so that you can more predictably count on some poker winnings from month to month and move up in stakes so you can do that at a bigger level, of course. So that's what we're going to do today, is check out this video from my new student. So thank you to Mr. Drive My Nuts, a very clever name for a handle, but we're going to go through his play and see what we can do to help him win more money. So here's an interesting situation on table 2. And his HUD is a little bit small, but I think that I can read it here. I think. Well, and actually that's an important thing that I'm going to bring up. So first thing that I usually do when people come to me and they ask me for advice on how to improve their PLO game, a lot of times people who send me videos like this, my first instinct is to tell them to cut down on the HUD, right? I'm a big believer in, especially with poker, that less is more, and not necessarily that big HUDs, you can't make them work for you, and certainly not saying that nobody makes big HUDs work for them, but I in general think that 90% of the players who come to me have way too much going on in their HUD, and it not only distracts them in game from just having a lot going on, but it also prevents them from really focusing on the things that matter in game. When I was really grinding a lot of Zoom and a lot of Rush, I had and I think that playing Zoom and Rush is an awesome way to put in a lot of volume and really sharpen your game in the beginning. I think that as you grow into a better player, you can have a bigger edge in the normal games. But I actually kind of made it a challenge for myself to simply label the players in different colors. So I could scroll through the lobby and see kind of grade the games based on the most frequent color that I saw. So for me, for example, like the weaker players are labeled as red or blue. And so the more red or blue there was in the lobby, the better the games are. Purple and pink for me are like solid or very good regs. So the more purple and pink there was, the less excited I was about sitting down and doing some grinding. And what I'm getting at is that there were times where, maybe I was having trouble with my poker software, and I could just play Zoom just based on like what color type the players are. And I think that for the most part, there's no way that you need this many stats to beat 100 PLO. Okay. A lot of times you see maybe some of the higher stakes guys have HUDs this big, but that's because I think that the players, the edges are a little bit thinner. For the most part, at the lower stakes, you really should be focused on developing default lines and just perfecting your skills at identifying player types and figuring out the right lines to take on each board. So my first thing that I would say to this player is, maybe thin out your HUD, at least cut out, I would say, half of this HUD. I mean, this is ridiculous. And if you really do need some of the numbers in this HUD, I mean, maybe put them in a pop-up or something. But if you really think that you're relying on this many stats for your HUD, I think that you're probably looking at poker the wrong way. That would be my opinion. And there's a lot of like higher stakes guys that don't even use a HUD. I mean, maybe not a lot, but I know Isildur, for example, definitely does not use a HUD. Granted, he's got a much different style. And granted, I also think that at the higher stakes that a HUD is actually less relevant in many cases because they have, that they're changing their games so much. They're all, and a lot of the things that you pick up on really has to do with like changing dynamic with players. So that would be my first instinct. And what I normally tell people is like, wow, I mean, look at this HUD, is it, and for some people can make it work, but I would say that the vast majority of people, in my opinion, having a HUD this big is kind of a distraction. It does more harm than good. And most players actually think that, having more information means that you're making more informed decisions, but actually a lot of times you're just creating clutter for yourself. So I would look out for that. So we, of course, get a nice hand here on table 2 and decide to raise. And I like that he's opening for pot. I mean, I think that sometimes at the smaller stakes in these Zoom games or these rush games, I think that actually you can get away with opening a little bit smaller in general, like playing a little bit. The normal like way that people play is in these games, they're like, players' preflop ranges are kind of tight, and I think that a lot of times you can get away with opening smaller because people have the, they have the auto fold on. So, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times, like if you're going to, in general, I recommend opening from pot from under the gun and from middle position most of the time, and then like 2.5x or 3x from the cutoff in the button. But I think that like if I am going to alter that at the lower stakes, I think that Zoom is where I'm going to do it because of the auto fold feature. It wouldn't be like, there's certain scenarios where I would squeeze this ace 10 9 7 double suited. Gay on TSE is, and I've seen him in other videos and stuff like that. He's kind of a reg. And if I'm reading this right, he's a 27-16. And I've mentioned in other videos the difference between attacking openers from the cutoff and attacking openers from the button. And, I really like to pound button openers. I think that I would almost always 3-bet this from the small blind facing a button open in any scenario. But when you're facing a reg opening in the cutoff versus a reg opening on the button, it's much different. A lot of players will be willing to open almost any 4 from the button, at least a lot of regulars. That's like the level 1 reg strategy is to open wide on the button. But I'm a lot less likely to attack cutoff opens in terms of attacking them with 3-bets because, part of the profit from 3-betting with a wide range comes from the knowledge of them having a wider than like a wide preflop range, and players' ranges from the cutoff are just so much tighter than on the button. And I know it doesn't seem like that because most people, when they refer to a late position steal, they kind of loop together cutoff and button opens. But in particular, like you'll see a lot of players have, maybe like 35% or 45% cutoff steals, maybe even lower than that, maybe 25%, but then their button steals like 65%. And it's just so many more weak hands in people's button ranges than there is in their cutoff range. So I just don't see as much value in squeezing from the small blind here, is what I was getting at. So I like the call. Although like if the cutoff was extremely loose and so was the button, like sometimes I'd squeeze there. But I think that calling is good as a default. In position, I'll squeeze that hand sometimes against like really loose pre-flop ranges. But I typically don't do it against tighter players. Here we decide to check the king, queen flop, which I think is pretty good. I mean, it's definitely a flop that connects well with like a middle position, just like cold calling range, or calling range, I should say. I'd probably isolate table 3. Whether or not I isolate, really just kind of depends on how tight or how aggressive the blinds are. From what we can tell, the big blind's very tight so far. Small blind looks like he could be aggressive. Again, like I'm kind of having trouble reading the HUD, but I assume that the first three numbers are VPIP, PFR, and 3-bet. These are the numbers I'm looking at right here. So the small blind's not particularly 3-betty. I'd isolate this. I think that folding is definitely a mistake. I mean, you have to at least play it. Ace, Jack, Jack, Deuce with a suit on the button. You have to play it in one way or another. It's just a matter of if you're going to limp it behind or if you're going to isolate it. What makes me want to isolate it less is that the cutoff is short. I don't like isolating short stacks light as much as 60 big blind stacks or maybe even 40 big blind stacks. So maybe that's what he was thinking, that he just didn't really like isolating because this player's short, and maybe he just didn't want to limp behind. But I think that you should at least play it. I mean, you can getting a good price on the limp. I mean, and I think that if you can't play this profitably, limping on the button, then you've got other problems. We check a king, queen, 6 rainbow flop. So, and we go for a delayed c-bet, which I like. I think that I would still c-bet this. I mean, it sucks because he is so short. But on the other hand, he didn't 3-bet pre-flop, and you would imagine that somebody who's that short wouldn't have too many. Would have probably a pre-weak hand for just peeling the button. So I would consider c-betting it because you can c-bet small since effective stacks are so short. But I think that it's okay to just be check folding too. Maybe check folding's the best. I don't mind it. But I was just saying that that's a board where, when you open the cutoff and get flatted by most button ranges, that's a board where even when I miss, I usually continue just because their flatting range on the button is really wide. So it's a board that connects better with your range than it does with their range. So I don't mind applying a little bit of pressure. Ace, king, queen, 4 with a nut suit on table 4. It's a hell of a hand, I'm not going to lie. And I think you guys know by now that, ace, king, queen, 4, ace, king, jack with a wheel card type hands are really some of my favorite hands to 3-bet and 4-bet. They just play really well in re-raised pots, especially against wide ranges. Against a nit, I usually play pretty tight in those kind of scenarios, but I think that in general, I do like to 3-bet and 4-bet those hands. Those are my favorite. Big cards, really, especially against wide pre-flop ranges. Big, ace, king, X type hands are awesome for against wide ranges. So here we have an interesting spot. We peel and open with king, king, 9, 6 with a nut suit, with a king high suit, and checks around, it looks like. Or maybe we check call. Let's see what happens. And I do like the peel pre. I mean, the stacks are a little bit deeper. We really don't want to get 4-bet with this hand, and there's just a lot of good benefits. I like the check call. It's kind of an awkward spot, right? I mean, and this is where good players will certainly be sticking in a lot of barrels. I don't necessarily like leading the river. I just think that, we could lead the river and turn our kings into a bluff here. He is going to have a lot of ace-x, but I know that, if he has any 2 pair, he's absolutely calling. And I just find it's a spot where we get looked up a lot. Yeah. So I think that, although he did check the turn, I think that most players are really, and we can take a look at his HUD stats. So there's a couple of ways to look at this spot, right? One being that, actually this is a great spot to talk about. So a few things. One, that he's tighter pre-flop, right? In general, I like to attack wide pre-flop ranges, especially on boards like this. I'm less prone on rivers to bluff nits for the most part. And that's just because tight pre-flop ranges are going to, of course, arrive at the river with better hands. And I think that when he checks the turn, I think that somebody who's kind of on a level 1 or a level 2 maybe would think that his checking is a sign of weakness, but I actually think that his checking is a sign that he's kind of showdown bound, especially being like a little bit deeper. He's maybe just doesn't want to get scared that he's like scared of getting check raised. And furthermore, like I think that if he did have a draw, which we're kind of counting on, he would have barreled that on the turn. So I really think that like when players take the bet flop line and then like check the turn line, I just think that they're pretty showdown heavy on these boards. I mean, some players who are very much one and done, that's true. But then again, like if he really is one and done, then you could probably just check the river here and win for the most part. I mean, you're trying to fold out exactly like ace, queen, jack, 10 here. So I don't know. And the second thing that I want to mention is, well, there's two more things. The second one being, if you are going to bluff, kind of bluff like you mean it, kind of go along with the third thing I was going to mention is players' bluff catching frequency is at its absolute highest in these kind of situations when the pot is like smaller, medium sized, and they're in position and they're facing one bet for like half pot or like 2/3 pot. And it's just like where players are really, really going to look you up with almost anything. This is where you see the lightest of light lookups. When you can't really leverage anything, you're not threatening a lot of big blinds. So I really try to like not really invest too much in bluffing in these situations. But if I do choose to bluff, I'll tell you that I usually go close to pot because I think that a lot of times players arrive at the river in these situations and they think, well, if he bets, like I'm going to call, and then you pot it or something, and they kind of that's when they do talk themselves out of calling. And I just think that like when you bet half pot or 2/3 pot here, you make it really easy on them to call you down, and it's where their frequency is already their bluff catching frequency is already going to be basically at its highest. So I think that like, and granted, if you would have potted it there, he would have called you anyway. But I think like if you're going to bet there, you should bet a little bit bigger. And it's one of those situations where his calling range really will be what's called elastic. I think it really, like whether he calls you or not, it really is dependent on his on your bet sizing. I could go with checking and I could go with betting here. I think that a lot of times, like, it just depends on how you interpret his C betting range. I think that when he checks back, it's really difficult for him to have much. So in that case, like, checking has a lot of merit because, you're not going to get like 2 streets of value out of if he has like queens or jacks anyway. You're only going to get 1 street. So maybe just wait until the river and maybe check with the intention of getting some value from like his bluffs. I would imagine he just folds here almost always. Yeah. The queen jack 7-4 on table 4, like I might open that if someone was particularly tight, but we don't really have any reads on the big blind here, so I think that just dumping it is fine. Not much to say there. Here, of course, we're going to 4-bet on table 3. Maybe one of the questions that's crossing your mind is what stack depth or what kind of situation would I not 4-bet this? Well, of course, this is a great situation for us now because this guy is cold 4-bet. But a situation where I would just call with this pre would be maybe if we were like 150 bigs. I might even, if the player's particularly like good, then maybe I'd even just call with 125 big blinds. It depends a little on how you interpret their 3-betting range. I think that if you were playing somebody who's pretty good, and I mean, this guy is just kind of a net. I mean, you could have a lot of like rundowny type hands. You don't expect most players to 3-bet like pocket kings in this situation, or like a lot of pocket kings combos. So there's a lot of merit to when you're a little bit deeper, like I said, like maybe 125 bigs or 150 bigs, to calling and seeing like a drier flop and then like check jamming. If it comes like queen 7-3 or jack 6 deuce, like pretending we didn't have like a set of deuces. Like if let's say we had like ace 3-3, it comes like jack 6 deuce. Like those are the kind of boards where, we can check jam. Or if the board comes like jack 10-4, we can just check fold. and not make, not like, and kind of take the low variance route and minimize kind of playing into their hands. Here we're going to definitely see a situation where two players have aces. Probably the cutoff, I guess. Interested to see what Game Morrow has. It's nice that we flop a set of deuces. We'll take that. And I think we win them both. Ship that shit. That's what I'm talking about. So, nice hand. Kind of played itself, but that's okay. We'll take 350 big blind pots whenever they want to come to us. That's for sure. This is another good example on table 2 of a hand that I would like cold 4-bet against a lot of 3-betting ranges. It's just a beautiful hand. It's nice having the ace and the king blocker. Like ace, queen, jack, deuce is a hand that I'm a lot more likely to cold call rather than like cold 4-bet. It just depends on how aggressive the game is and how wide the player's 3-bet range is pre-flop, though. I would call on table 3. We're certainly not thrilled about our hand, but in terms of pre-flop, this is pretty much where if you're going to like kind of start getting loose from the big blind and you're going to start like peeling wide pre-flop calls, this is absolutely the situation where you can kind of get in there. And a lot of pocket pair type hands will be what I'm peeling with here. I think that like pocket pairs typically have a pretty clear, it's like a pretty clear, it's just a clear like line of, which flops are good for you and which ones are not good for you. So, yeah, I think that I would call here. You're getting, it's $2 to win $7, even if you're going to be able to like bluff some flops. And in general, when you're facing a pre-flop call, that's usually like how I decide whether I call or not. Is if I can call and bluff on some flops, I'll almost always call. And I think that there are some flops, where we have the 5 blockers or, maybe, we have the ace of spade blocker, which is nice. There's going to be opportunities for us to peel and make good decisions. We decide to check back on the 8-7-5 two-tone. I actually like it. We really don't want to get check raised, and there's 2 different straights there. A lot of 2-pair combos. So I really like how we played this hand. I don't think I would fire again if called, although it's not a terrible spot for it because his range is kind of capped. I really think that most players in that situation are going to lead with their trip 8s. So it might not be a bad spot to like bet the turn and then fire the river. You don't have that many 8s in your range in that situation, but he has like even less 8s in his range. Ace, king, jack, 7 with a nut suit. I'm definitely opening this. I'm less likely to like cold 4-bet when the ace X can't make the low straight. That's certainly too tight pre if you're not opening that. Yeah, you got to open that. So a couple of things to consider, one being, let's look at who the other players in the hand are. I like the fact that we're going to have position on the small blind and he seems kind of bad. He's loose and bad. The button is not going to abuse us with 3 bets very much. So that's good. We see he's like a 46-16, so he's just kind of a weaker player. So I'm not like thrilled about somebody who's this loose pre having position on us, but our hand is just too strong to fold here. If you find yourself folding this, then you're playing too tight. Even if like Isildur was on the button, I would still play that. In fact, if Isildur was on the button, I would probably 3-bet and 4-bet that. I said that I don't really like 4-betting ace, king, jack, 7, but against if players are loose enough with their 3-betting, then you just kind of close your eyes and do it. Certainly calling on table 1 if somebody else calls. I think if like somebody 3-bet, I would just dump it, but it's a pretty easy call. And in position against a lot of ranges, I will be like 3-betting that. Against like, I mean, I think that, so this is a pretty common situation that happens in Zoom or Rush is you got a default player, you don't really know what to do. They raise pre, you call, and it checks through. These are just situations where I stab 100%. There's an argument for checking here because now we did pick up some showdown value. So maybe we could check call. But I think that I'd still lead. And if nothing else, you could lead small. And if he calls, that gives you actually some information about what kind of player he is. So I've talked a lot about in other videos about defining players' c-betting ranges and, you know, what like your starting point should be for that. And the starting point for me is figuring out if people are the type that continuation bet with air or they check with their air in obvious spots. So what I'm getting at is, let's say that you lead the turn here and he calls. Well, then if you lead the turn and he calls, that kind of tells you that he checked back with a medium strength hand. Like maybe he checked back an ace, or maybe he just checked back like kings and now he's calling you once. But if you lead the turn and he folds, then you know that his checking back range is generally weak. So that's important because when you start to play other players, or, you know, especially heads up, a lot of times that's really what I look for, is where are people putting their medium strength hands? Do they put the medium strength hands in their betting range, or do they put medium strength hands in their checking range? And that's just kind of what I look for. And it can be valuable because, you know, it's funny when you're playing higher level players in a lot of high stakes games. A lot of players understand this principle, you know, the principle of polarized c-betting. And if you see them bet, it's actually a sign that they're weak. So it's nice. You're like, oh, sweet, he's betting. That means he doesn't have anything. But if you see them check, it's usually a red flag to not continue or put any more money into the pot, because it's usually the situations that they end up calling you down. So we check. I just guess we're going to call. You know, it's certainly good enough to call with. Oh, and we decided to check raise. And I think that that's actually not bad. You might get looked up here, but, you know, you guys don't have any history, so maybe he's just going to give you credit. I think that in general, I prefer calling more than I prefer check raising because, you know, against the hands that are going to fold to a check raise, I think that we beat anyway. Of course, we turn pretty good on table 2. And let's double check and see what the action was. I imagine we raised pre and then c-bet the flop. Yep. Okay. And as played, I don't know. I mean, you could fall through. It's not terrible. I prefer to not fall through if I don't have any reads, but, you know, I admire the heart. I still think that if you bet, though, you should go bigger. I don't really like betting this small. And he does give up, which I mean, it's going to go check here, and he's probably just going to have, like, I don't know. I'd be kind of surprised if he checked back a 3, but I guess it's possible. But if he bets here, it's pretty strong. Yeah. We are the freaking best if we check raise and he folds. Here on table 3, I would just dump this. He does seem pretty aggressive, so that makes me want to call more, and it's cut off first button. So, yeah, maybe it'd be too tight to dump it. I'd probably call. Yeah, I think I'd call. I think that it's best to just donk lead for pot. I don't think that, like, this is a board where you see a lot of c-bet bluffs, and we kind of want him to fold, so I wouldn't hate just, like, leading for pot, because I think you're going to get a lot of folds. I think it's a board where he's just, like, not going to be putting in a lot of bluffs. So, you know, also, like, check jamming. Maybe, actually, you know, the more I think about it, the more I like check jamming. I think that he's just going to fold almost always now. It's a board that's, like, you know, honestly, if, like, we check and he bets, I'm not thrilled because I think it's a board where, like, it should have hit his button 3-betting range pretty hard. And, of course, like, I would definitely lead again. But, you know, I wouldn't pot it. I think that I'd bet, like, 31 or something. Give him like a pretty good price to call, just because I think most of his flush draws would have bet the flop. I think it's just gonna go check. Yeah, he's gonna have like 6-7x or like 8-6x or something. Hopefully we get to see the last hand and it shows us what he had. But it's important to and we'll close with this hand. So it's important to break down like kind of the action on each street, right? The reason that I don't like, you kind of like, I mean, and most players are familiar with, you sort of like start, when you're trying to range people, you kind of put all of the hands that they could possibly have in a bucket. And then you gradually like take hands out of that bucket as, you progress through the hand. And I think that, so you can take basically nut flush draws out of his range. I think that almost all of his nut flush draw combos would have bet the flop. Even if he has like the worst aces with, the only like nut flush draw hand he would check back on the flop would be exactly like ace, king, queen, jack with nut hearts or something like that. Or maybe, because I think that even if, let's say he had like ace, deuce, 4 with nut hearts, I still think that he's probably betting that flop. Some people might check it, but I think that for the most part, like the majority of his nut flush draw combos would bet the flop. So I would say his range is not heavy in nut flush draw combos. We know he doesn't have a straight, and I also think that most of his like naked overpairs, they just fold to a turn lead. So what that really leaves us here with is like maybe a really bad straight. I could see him sometimes having like 4-5, or like 2 pairs is really like the bulk of his range, or like a pair and an open ender. A lot of times people will check that back too. If he has like an 8-9 queen jack, that would be a hand that he would probably check back. But so what I'm getting at is like the majority of his range here, when it goes check and then we lead the turn and he calls, is really showdown bound hands. And it's important to recognize those situations because I kind of like know what this player was thinking. His thought process was probably he thought that the river was a good bluffing card for our opponent, but I think that just our opponent has so many like 2 pairs and other showdown bound hands that aren't going to bluff, that he's not going to bluff with, that it's just so much it's a mistake to not continue betting because I mean his range is just kind of clearly medium strength hands. And I would say it's, especially at these limits, and really like all limits, this is true for the high stakes too, but people just aren't prone to turning medium strength hands into bluffs. So it's better to just bet for value. I mean, it's really unlikely that we're beat. It's extremely likely in fact. And the biggest sin in all of poker is to check a hand that's like pretty much the clear winner that will get called by worse. And I usually say that the easiest way to lose money in poker is to the easiest way to lose money in poker is to build up pots and give up on them. But equally, the easiest way to win money in poker is to just bet in these situations. And also, this is a situation that if you don't catch it, it will also prevent you from winning a lot of money. So let's close with that. We will continue this session. I think there's actually a lot of really interesting spots, and it's cool to see through the lens of somebody who's just kind of starting to get into PLO. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any feedback in the comments section. As always, good luck. This is Casino Crime signing off. Thanks.